Princess Adiz stood in front of the mirror, staring at her own reflection, and for the first time in her life, she did not like what she saw. It was not her face. Her face was lovely, everyone said so. It was something behind her eyes, a tightness, a coldness, that had crept in slowly over the years, and today, watching her father smile at another girl the way he used to smile only at her, that coldness had turned into something sharper. Something that felt uncomfortably like jealousy. She did not want to feel this way, but she did not know how to stop. Before we go further, if you're watching this tonight, tell us in the comments where in the world you're joining us from. Give this video a like and hit subscribe because this is a story about pride, jealousy, and the surprising way a heart can learn to soften, and you will want to see how it ends. Adiz was the only child of King Obiora, ruler of the peaceful kingdom of Edo, a land of golden afternoons, friendly markets, and rivers that sparkled like silver under the sun. Her mother had passed away when Adiz was very young, and her father, though a kind and loving king, had spent so many years trying to make up for that loss that he had given his daughter everything she ever asked for. Everything except the one thing she needed most. A little bit of no. So Adiz grew up used to being the center of every room. The prettiest gown was always hers first. The best seat at every feast was always hers. And whenever visitors came to the palace and praised her beauty, her grace, her singing voice, she would glow with pride for days. It was a comfortable way to live until the day Ijeoma arrived. Ijeoma was the daughter of a brave chief who had died protecting the kingdom's borders. Out of gratitude and kindness, King Obiora invited the orphaned girl to live in the palace and grow up alongside his own daughter, hoping the two girls would become like sisters. First they did. Ijeoma was warm and easygoing, quick to laugh, quick to help, and never once did she try to outshine the princess. She admired Adiz openly and often, telling her how lovely her singing was, how elegant she looked in her gowns, how lucky the kingdom was to have such a graceful princess. For a while Adiz liked having her around. But slowly, without meaning to, Ijeoma began to shine in her own quiet way. The village children adored her stories. The palace cooks saved her the sweetest mangoes without being asked. And during the kingdom's yam festival, when King Obiora had to choose someone to carry the sacred basket to the shrine, he chose Ijeoma instead of Adiz, as a tribute to her father's sacrifice. It was meant as a kind gesture. But to Adiz it felt like losing something she didn't know she could lose. That night, she sat by her window and let herself feel the ache of it. Not screaming, not crying, just sitting quietly with a heart that had grown a little tight, a little sore. Her handmaiden and childhood friend, Kayamaka, found her there. "You have been quiet all evening," Kayamaka said gently, sitting beside her. "I am happy for Ijeoma," Adiz said, though her voice wobbled slightly on the word happy. Kayamaka smiled, not unkindly. "It is all right to feel two things at once. You can be happy for her, and still feel a little sad for yourself. That does not make you a bad person, Adiz. It makes you human." Adiz looked at her friend, surprised. No one had ever told her that before. She had always believed that a princess must be perfect, always gracious, always generous, always glowing with confidence. She had never been given permission to simply feel what she felt. "I don't like who I become when I feel this way," Adiz admitted quietly. "I say unkind things in my head. I want people to notice only me." "Then maybe," Kayamaka said, "it is not Ijeoma who needs to change. Maybe it is time you asked yourself why one basket, one compliment, one smile from your father, can shake you so deeply." It was a simple question, gently asked, but it planted itself in Adiz's heart like a seed that would take the rest of the story to grow. Over the following weeks, Adiz tried to ignore the question. She told herself she was simply protective of her place in the kingdom, that any princess would feel the same. But small moments kept catching her off guard. One afternoon she overheard two washerwomen by the river, laughing about how sweet and humble Ijeoma was, how she always thanked them for the smallest kindness. Adiz felt her chest tighten before she even realized she was listening. Another evening, her father lingered a little longer at dinner asking Ijeoma about her father's old stories, his eyes soft with memory, and Adiz found herself pushing food around her plate, saying nothing, feeling everything. She began to notice how often these small stings happened, and more importantly, she began to notice how tired they made her. Jealousy, she was slowly learning, was exhausting. It never let her simply enjoy a room. It made her keep score of attention, keep score of smiles, keep score of who was loved a little more that day. One morning, everything came to a gentle head. The kingdom was preparing for a visit from a neighboring prince, Prince Kelechi, who was known throughout the land for his fairness and his famously discerning eye. A suitor who, it was rumored, was traveling specifically to consider both girls as a possible match for marriage, since he had grown close to King Obiora's court over the years. The moment Adiz heard this, the old familiar tightness returned to her chest, stronger than before. She spent the morning trying on gown after gown, having her hair braided and rebraided 3 times, practicing her most charming laugh in the mirror. She wanted to be undeniable. She wanted more than anything to be chosen. But when Prince Kelechi finally arrived, something happened that Adiz never expected. He was not dazzled by gowns or performances at all. He spoke gently to the palace staff. He asked thoughtful questions of the elders. And when he finally sat down to speak with both young women together, he asked them each the very same simple question. What is something you are proud of, that has nothing to do with how you look? Ijeoma answered first, speaking softly about how she had taught herself to read the old scrolls in her father's memory, and how she hoped one day to teach village children to read as well. Then the prince turned to Adiz, waiting. And for the first time in her life, Princess Adiz opened her mouth to answer a question about herself, and found she had absolutely nothing to say. The silence stretched a little too long. Adiz opened her mouth once, then closed it again. She could feel Prince Kelechi's patient eyes on her, and Ijeoma's kind ones too, not mocking, just waiting, and somehow that gentleness made the silence even harder to sit in. She started, then stopped again. She wanted to say something about her singing voice, her dancing, the way she could charm an entire room of visiting nobles. But even as the words rose in her throat, she understood, with a small jolt of embarrassment, that none of those things were things she had built. They were things she had been given: a pretty face, a graceful figure, a father's endless praise. She had never once asked herself what she was proud of that she had made herself with her own hands or her own heart. I don't know, she finally admitted, quietly, and it was the most honest sentence she had spoken in years. Prince Kelechi did not laugh at her, and he did not look disappointed either. He simply nodded, as though her answer told him something useful, something he had come a long way to learn. That is all right, he said gently. Not everyone has had the chance to ask themselves that question, but it is worth asking. He excused himself soon after, promising to return the following week before he continued his journey, and Adiz was left alone with a strange, uncomfortable feeling settling in her chest. Not embarrassment exactly, something closer to waking up. That evening, she found herself walking the palace gardens long after the sun had gone down, her feet carrying her without much direction. She was surprised to find Ijeoma there too, sitting quietly beside the fish pond, tracing patterns in the water with her fingers. Adiz almost turned back. Some old, tired part of her wanted to avoid the girl altogether, to protect herself from another quiet reminder of everything she felt she lacked. But something new in her, something small and curious, made her sit down instead, a careful distance away. You answered so easily, Adiz said after a long moment. About the scrolls. About teaching children. Ijeoma looked up, surprised but not unkind. I have had a lot of quiet years to think about what matters to me, she said. When my father died, I did not have gowns or feasts to distract me. I only had his old books, and long afternoons with nothing to do but read them. Adiz was quiet, turning this over. She had always assumed that Ijeoma's calm confidence came naturally, that some people were simply born humble and grounded while others, like herself, were born wanting more. But hearing it now, she realized Ijeoma's steadiness had been built the hard way, out of loss, not luck. I have never lost anything the way you have, Adiz said slowly. Except my mother, and I do not even remember her enough to properly grieve her. That is its own kind of loss, Ijeoma said softly. Perhaps a harder one. At least I have memories to hold on to. You have only an absence. It was the first time in 2 years that the two girls had spoken to each other so plainly, without performance, without the careful politeness that had always sat between them like a wall neither had tried very hard to knock down. I have not always been kind to you, Adiz admitted, the words feeling strange and heavy in her mouth. Not out loud. But in my heart, I have resented you more times than I can count. Ijeoma did not look shocked. If anything, she looked almost relieved, as though she had sensed this truth for a long time and had simply been waiting for the princess to say it aloud. I always wondered, she said gently. I could feel it sometimes in small ways. I told myself it was only my imagination because I never wanted it to be true. I did not come here to take anything from you, Adiz. I only ever wanted a home, and maybe a friend. Something in Adiz's chest cracked open at those words, not painfully, but like a window finally letting in fresh air after being shut too long. I think, Adiz said quietly, I have spent so many years being told I was the most beautiful, the most graceful, the most everything, that I forgot to become anything at all. I was so busy being admired that I never learned to admire myself for something real. They sat together in silence for a while after that, the kind of silence that no longer felt like a wall, but like the beginning of a bridge. Over the following days, something in Adiz began slowly to shift. She started small. She asked the palace tutor, who had once taught her basic reading as a child before she grew bored of lessons, to begin teaching her again, properly this time. Not the histories of kings and wars, but the healing arts practiced by the kingdom's elder women, the ones who tended to villagers when they fell ill. It was something Ijeoma had once mentioned admiring from a distance, and something that stirred, unexpectedly, a genuine curiosity in Adiz herself. At first, she was clumsy and impatient, frustrated that her fingers did not know how to properly grind herbs, or that her memory struggled to hold the names of 100 different roots. She was used to things coming easily to her, used to praise arriving the moment she tried anything at all. This was different. This required failure and trying again and failing more gently the second time. But little by little, she began to notice something new blooming inside her chest whenever she succeeded at something on her own. A warmth that felt sturdier, quieter, and far more satisfying than the fleeting glow of a stranger's compliment. She also began spending real time with Ijeoma, not out of obligation, but because she found, to her own surprise, that she genuinely enjoyed her company. They walked the markets together, laughed over silly things and slowly, without ever announcing it, became something like sisters after all. The very thing King Obiora had hoped for, years too late and yet somehow exactly on time. Word of the princess's quiet transformation began to spread through the palace. The cooks noticed she now asked after their families. The guards noticed she greeted them by name. Her father noticed, with a tenderness he had not felt in years, that his daughter laughed more easily now, and more often, and that her laughter no longer seemed to require an audience to be real. But not everyone in the palace was pleased by this change. There was one person who had built her entire place in the court around Adiz's old pride, old vanity, and old need for constant admiration, and as the princess grew steadier and kinder, this person grew quietly, dangerously afraid of being left behind. Her name was Lady Ugonna, an older cousin of the king who had spent years subtly encouraging Adiz's jealousy of Ijeoma, whispering little comparisons in her ear, feeding the very fire the princess was now trying so hard to put out. And as she watched Adiz slip further from her influence with each passing week, Lady Ugonna began to search for a way to bring the old jealousy roaring back to life, before it was too late for her own carefully guarded plans. Lady Ugonna had never much liked change, and she liked it least of all when the change threatened to leave her with nothing to do. For years, she had made herself useful to Princess Adiz in a very particular way, always ready with a comment about someone else's dress being a little too fine, someone else's smile being a little too eager for attention, someone else's closeness to the king being a little too convenient. It was not that Lady Ugonna was a cruel woman by nature. She had simply learned long ago that a princess who felt threatened was a princess who needed her close, and a princess who needed her close was a princess who kept her fed, housed, and important. But now the princess sat in the garden laughing easily with the very girl Lady Ugonna had spent 2 years teaching her to resent, and worse still, she no longer seemed to need anyone whispering in her ear at all. So Lady Ugonna decided it was time to whisper a little louder. She began gently, the way she always did. At a small gathering of court ladies one afternoon, she sighed and said, just loud enough to be overheard, "It is remarkable how Ijeoma has settled in so well here. One almost forgets she was not born to this palace at all. I do wonder sometimes if she forgets it too." It was a small comment dressed up as harmless observation, but it was aimed carefully, like a seed planted in soil she hoped was still soft enough to receive it. Word of the comment reached Adiz within the hour, carried gently by Kayamaka, who had learned over the years to warn the princess of such things rather than let her be blindsided by them. The old Adiz, Kayamaka knew, would have latched onto those words instantly, turning them over and over until they grew into something bigger and uglier than they had ever truly been. But the Adiz sitting before her now only frowned thoughtfully, then shook her head. "She wants me to feel the old way again," Adiz said slowly, almost surprised at her own clarity. "She wants me small and jealous, because that is when she is most useful to me." Still, though she recognized the trick for what it was, Adiz found that recognizing a thorn did not make stepping on it painless. That night, alone in her chamber, she felt the old familiar tightness creep back into her chest, faint but unmistakable, like an old scar aching before rain. She thought of Igioma's easy laugh, her gentle confidence, the way people seemed drawn to her without her ever asking for it, and for a moment, just a moment, the new peace Adiz had been building felt terribly fragile. She almost did not go to find Igioma that night. But she made herself go anyway, because she had learned something important these past weeks, that jealousy grew strongest in silence and secrecy, and weakest in the honest light of a real conversation. She found Igioma exactly where she expected, reading quietly by candlelight in the small library that had once belonged to her father's collection of scrolls. "Lady Ugana is saying things about you," Adiz said plainly, sitting down across from her. "About you forgetting your place here." Igioma looked up, her expression flickering briefly with hurt before settling into something calmer. "I have heard whispers like that before," she said. "I try not to let them settle too deeply." "I almost let them settle in me tonight," Adiz admitted. "Just for a moment. I felt the old jealousy again, listening to her words, even though I know exactly what she is trying to do." Igioma studied her for a long moment, and then gently, she reached out and took Adiz's hand. "Thank you for telling me instead of hiding it," she said. The old Adiz would have hidden it until it turned into something much bigger. "I do not want to be her anymore," Adiz said quietly. "But I am learning that becoming someone new does not happen all at once. Sometimes the old feelings still visit, even after I thought I had said goodbye to them. Then we will keep saying goodbye to them together every time they visit," Igioma said simply, and something about the plainness of her words settled the last of the ache in Adiz's chest. If you are enjoying this story so far, take a moment to like this video and leave a comment telling us which part has touched you the most. Stories like this remind us that even the hardest feelings can soften with honesty, and we would love to hear your thoughts. Lady Ugana, however, was not finished. When her first comment failed to reignite the old rivalry, she tried something bolder. She began telling select members of the court, quietly and with great feigned reluctance, that she had heard rumors Igioma intended to use her growing closeness with the king to eventually claim a formal title in the royal line, perhaps even to be considered above Adiz herself in matters of succession. It was not true. It had never been true. But rumors, Lady Ugana knew well, did not need to be true to do damage. They only needed to be repeated often enough, by enough respectable mouths, until they began to feel true. This time, the rumor reached King Obiora himself before it reached his daughter, and being a fair but sometimes overly cautious ruler, he called both young women before him to address it directly, wanting to settle the matter honestly, rather than let it fester unspoken. Adiz felt her stomach twist with old, familiar fear as she stood beside Igioma before her father's throne. A part of her, small and stubborn, whispered that here, finally, was her chance. A chance to let the rumor stand unchallenged, to let her father's uncertainty work quietly in her favor, to reclaim without lifting a finger, the singular place in his heart she had once felt so certain of. It would have been so easy. She would not even have had to lie. She would only have had to stay silent. But when she opened her mouth to speak, it was not silence that came out. "Father," Adiz said clearly, her voice steadier than she expected. "Igioma has never once asked for anything beyond a home and my friendship. This rumor is not hers. I believe it comes from someone who benefits greatly from the two of us staying divided." The court fell silent. King Obiora's eyes moved slowly from his daughter to Lady Ugana, who stood near the back of the hall, her composed expression faltering just slightly at the edges. For the first time in the entire story, the old Adiz, the one who measured her worth by comparison, who needed to be the only light in every room, was nowhere to be found. In her place stood a young woman who had chosen, quite deliberately, to defend someone else's honor even when protecting her own old fears might have been easier. But the king's eyes, now fixed thoughtfully on Lady Ugonna, told everyone in that hall that the true reckoning of this story was not yet finished. King Obiora did not raise his voice, but the quiet weight of his question filled the entire hall. "Lady Ugonna," he said, "where did this rumor about Igioma's ambitions first come from?" Lady Ugonna's composed smile flickered again, and this time it did not recover. She reached for an explanation, something about concerned court members and things she had merely heard repeated, but her words came out tangled and uncertain, nothing like her usual smooth confidence. Kayamika, standing quietly near the princess, chose that moment to step forward, her voice respectful but steady. "Forgive me, my king, but I have heard Lady Ugonna speak similar words herself more than once in the company of the court ladies. I did not think much of it until now." One by one, encouraged by Kayamika's small bravery, two other members of the court admitted, hesitantly, that they too had first heard the rumor from Lady Ugonna's own lips, dressed each time as innocent gossip, never once as her own opinion. King Obiora studied his cousin for a long, heavy moment. He was not a man who enjoyed punishing family, and something in his tired eyes showed that this discovery saddened him more than it angered him. "You have spent years encouraging division in this household," he said finally, "for reasons I imagine had more to do with your own comfort than with any real concern for my daughter." Lady Ugonna did not deny it. Perhaps she understood there was little use in denying it any longer. The king did not banish her, nor strip her of her title, for he was, above all, a fair man who believed people could still learn, even late in life. Instead, he asked her to spend the following season away from the palace, staying with distant relatives in a quieter province, to reflect, as he put it gently, on what kind of legacy she truly wished to leave behind. Lady Ugonna left the hall in silence, and though a few in the court expected Adiz to feel triumphant watching her old, unhelpful confidant fall from favor, the princess instead felt something closer to sadness. She understood, perhaps better than anyone else in that hall, exactly how loneliness and fear could curdle slowly into the kind of behavior that hurt everyone around it, including oneself. If this story has taught you anything so far about letting go of old comparisons, take a moment to comment the biggest lesson you are carrying away with you tonight, and share this story with someone who might need to hear it too. Spring arrived gently over the kingdom of Edo not long after, bringing with it the return of Prince Kelechi, exactly as he had promised. He found the palace much changed from his last visit, though nothing about it looked different to the eye. The gardens were the same. The golden afternoon still stretched lazily over the rivers. But the people within those walls carried themselves differently now, especially the princess he had left with an unanswerable question weeks before. When he asked her again, this time in the quiet of the palace gardens rather than the formal stiffness of a court audience, "What is something you are proud of, that has nothing to do with how you look?" Adiz did not hesitate. "I have been learning the healing arts from the palace elders," she said. "I am still clumsy with it and I forget more herbs than I remember, but yesterday I helped ease a village child's fever using only what I have learned these past weeks, and it felt more satisfying than any compliment I have ever received about my singing voice." She paused, then added, quieter, "I have also learned, I think, how to be a real friend. Igioma taught me that, more than anyone." Prince Kelechi smiled, and this time there was no test hidden behind his question, only genuine warmth. "That," he said, "is a far more interesting answer than the one you gave me before." He did not choose a bride that day, nor the day after, for he was, like the king, a patient man who believed important choices should not be rushed. But over the following weeks, he found himself spending equal, easy time with both young women, no longer searching for who might be the most beautiful or the most impressive, but simply enjoying getting to know two friends who had, against old expectations, chosen kindness over rivalry. What became of that choice, whether it settled eventually on marriage, alliance, or simple lasting friendship between three kind hearts, mattered in the end, far less than the transformation that had already taken place inside the palace walls long before he made any decision at all. Because the truest ending of this story was not a wedding, nor a crown, nor a final triumphant declaration of who was the fairest in the kingdom of Edo. The truest ending was much quieter than that. It was Adiz, months later, sitting beside Ijeoma in the healing hut on the edge of the village, teaching a young village girl how to properly grind a fever root, patient with the child's clumsy hands the way no one had ever been patient with her own clumsiness as a girl. It was the two friends walking home together at dusk, laughing over something small and unimportant, with no need to measure whose laughter had been louder, or who the villagers had smiled at more warmly that day. It was a princess who had once broken a mirror in a fit of jealousy, learning, slowly and imperfectly, that her worth had never actually depended on being the only beautiful thing in any room, only on becoming, patiently and honestly, someone worth being proud of from the inside out. Jealousy, the old women of Edo liked to say afterward, whenever they told this story to their own daughters and granddaughters, is not a sign that something is wrong with the person feeling it. It is only a sign that something inside them is asking, quietly and often clumsily, to be noticed, to be built, to be loved for reasons that have nothing to do with comparison at all. Princess Adiz learned that lesson the hard way. Through broken mirrors and quiet gardens, and one very patient friend who never once let old wounds turn into old grudges. And if there is one thing worth carrying with you from her story tonight, perhaps it is this. The moment you stop measuring your worth against someone else's shine, you finally have the chance to discover your own. If this story moved you, please subscribe for more. Share it with someone who needs it. Seasons turn gently over the kingdom of Edo, the way they always had, though those who lived within the palace walls would later say that something in the air itself felt lighter after that spring. A full year passed before Prince Kelechi finally made his choice known, and when he did, it surprised no one who had watched him closely those past months. He asked to marry neither Adiz nor Ijeoma alone, but rather asked King Obiora's blessing to formally join both young women's lives to his own kingdom in the way that mattered most to him, not as rival brides competing for a single crown, but as two women he had come to deeply respect, each in her own right, each free to choose her own path forward. To Ijeoma, he offered a formal position as royal healer and scholar to his own court, a role that would let her continue the work she loved, now with far greater resources than the small healing hut of Edo could offer. Ijeoma wept when she heard the offer, not from sorrow, but from the astonishment of being seen so completely for exactly who she was, rather than for who anyone needed her to be. To Adiz he offered his hand in marriage, not because she was the most beautiful woman he had met, though she certainly was, but because he had watched her, patiently and honestly, become someone whose company he genuinely wanted for the rest of his life, someone who could sit with her own flaws without hiding from them, and someone who now knew how to love another woman's success without feeling smaller beside it. Adiz did not answer him right away. Old habits, she had learned, sometimes needed a little space before a big decision, and she wanted to be certain her answer came from her own steady heart, not from old fears of losing something if she said no. She spent 3 days walking the palace gardens alone, and one whole afternoon sitting quietly with Ijeoma beside the fish pond where their friendship had first been rebuilt. "Are you afraid?" Ijeoma asked her gently. "That saying yes to him means saying goodbye to me?" Adiz considered this honestly before answering. "A little," she admitted. "The old part of me still worries that good things must be scarce, that if I have a husband and a kingdom, somehow there will be less room for you in my life." "And the new part of you?" Ijeoma asked, smiling. Adiz laughed softly. "The new part of me knows that is nonsense. You are not leaving my life, Ijeoma. You are simply going to heal people in a bigger house than before. And I will visit you constantly until your new patients grow tired of seeing my face." They both laughed at that, easily, the sound of two women who had earned their friendship the hard way, and had no intention of losing it now. Adiz said yes to Prince Kelechi 3 days later, in the same garden where he had first asked her an impossible question about pride. This time, when he asked what she was most proud of, she did not hesitate for even a moment. "I am proud," she said, "that I learned how to want good things for someone else, even when it once felt like it cost me something. I did not know that kind of strength existed in me, until I nearly lost it completely." The wedding took place at the start of the next dry season, under a canopy of woven palm leaves and hanging strings of small white flowers, with both kingdoms' colors displayed side by side for the first time in a generation, the deep reds and golds of Edo beside the whites and royal blues of Kelechi's Yoruba homeland, a quiet symbol that two different peoples could stand together without either one dimming the other's light. Ijeoma stood beside Adiz throughout the ceremony, not as a rival long ago set aside, but as the closest thing to a sister the princess had ever had. When it came time for the traditional blessing of well wishes, it was Ijeoma who stepped forward first, her voice steady with an emotion that surprised even her. "When I first came to this palace," she said, addressing the gathered crowd, "I was a girl with nothing but a small bundle of cloth and a father's memory to hold on to. I did not expect to find a home here. I certainly did not expect to find a sister. But I found both in the last person I ever imagined finding them in, someone who once saw me as a threat, and instead chose again and again to see me as family." There was not a dry eye among the older women of the court, who remembered clearly the girl who had once shattered a mirror in a fit of jealous rage, and who now stood radiant and generous before them, genuinely glowing with happiness for someone else's place in her life. King Obiora, watching from his throne with the same tired, kind eyes he had carried since the day his wife passed and left him to raise a daughter alone, allowed himself, for the first time in many years, to cry openly in front of his court. He did not try to hide it. A few of the younger nobles exchanged surprised glances, unused to seeing their steady king so moved, but the elders among them only nodded knowingly, understanding exactly what it meant to watch a wound you had carried for years finally begin, truly, to heal. Life in the years that followed was not without its ordinary difficulties, for no marriage, no friendship, and no kingdom moves forward without the occasional disagreement or hard season. There were harvests that failed and had to be carefully managed, disagreements between the two kingdoms, customs that had to be patiently untangled, and small personal moments where old insecurities tried, quietly, to creep back into Adi's heart. But each time they did, she now had the tools to meet them honestly instead of letting them fester in silence. She had learned slowly and sometimes clumsily that jealousy was not a monster to be permanently defeated once and never seen again, but rather an old visitor that occasionally knocked at the door of anyone's heart, especially in moments of change or uncertainty. The difference, she had come to understand, was not whether the visitor came, but whether you let it move in and take over the house, or simply acknowledged it, sat with it for a moment, and gently showed it back out the door. Ijeoma thrived in her new role at Kelechi's court, eventually training a small circle of her own students in the healing arts, several of whom traveled back and forth freely between the two kingdoms, carrying not only medicine, but friendship and understanding between two peoples who had once regarded each other mostly as distant neighbors. Lady Ugonna, for her part, returned from her season of quiet reflection changed in small but genuine ways. She never became a particularly warm woman, her sharp edges having been carved too deeply over too many years to disappear entirely, but she stopped whispering comparisons into younger ears, and she was occasionally, surprisingly, seen offering a rare word of honest praise to a servant or a young noblewoman who had once been beneath her notice. Old habits soften slowly, the elders of Edu like to say, but they can soften, given enough time and enough humility to try. Years later, when Adis herself was a mother, raising a daughter of her own beneath the same golden skies of Edu, she made certain to do one thing differently than her own father once had, however lovingly he had tried. She let her daughter feel disappointment sometimes. She let her hear the word no. And whenever her daughter felt a flicker of jealousy toward another child's toy, another child's praise, another child's place in a room, Adis would kneel down to her level, the way Kayamika had once done for her, and say gently, "It is all right to feel that. It does not make you unkind. It only means there is something inside you asking to be noticed, built, and loved for reasons of your own. Let us go find out what that might be together." And so the story of the proud and jealous princess became, in time, not a warning passed down to frighten young girls away from ever feeling envy at all, for envy, the wise women of Edu had come to understand, was simply a part of being human. Instead, it became a gentler kind of story, one told beside evening fires for generations afterward, reminding every new listener that the moment you learn to build your own quiet pride, rather than borrow it from comparison, is the exact moment you finally become free to love the people around you without fear of losing yourself in the process. If this final chapter brought you joy tonight, let us know in the comments how you felt watching Adi's journey come full circle, and subscribe if you would like more heartfelt stories like this one, told slowly, honestly, and with a lesson worth carrying with you long after the fire has burned low.